Hey, what's going on everyone? In this video, we'll be going over 1997's Master Grade Gundam GP01 from the anime series Gundam 0083 Stardust Memory. Yeah, coming out in August of 1997, this kit is now over 25 years old. And yet, it's still one of the only ways to get this lead Gundam on your shelf in 1/100th scale. That's just so crazy to me. How has Bandai let such a cool suit fall so behind? Regardless, I'm a pretty big fan of old school Master Grades anyway, so something tells me that even if there was a version 2.0 or a version Kaitoki, I still probably would have picked this kit up. As always, we'll be looking over this kit in 4 categories: the build, appearance, articulation, and the gimmicks. Like my other Master Grade reviews, we'll be giving each a score from 1 to 5, so at the end we can tally everything up for an average score. Hopefully, this review can help you decide if you'd be interested in picking up more classic kits like this. Anyway, let's jump right into this build. With this kit coming out in the late 90s, its build is of course super old school. It features some really out there engineering that you just don't see on modern Master Grades. My favorite being the use of a ball joint for the upper arm. Instead of the pegs we're so used to seeing, we get a ball joint and a polycap here. It still only provides a 360-degree spin, so the use of a ball joint here is entirely pointless. But still, how weird is this? There's also this use of a polycap ring around this peg at the knee, and the use of ball joints for the heel and toe. Just strange stuff going on here. I'm also a huge fan of this piston in the ankle that leads to literally nowhere. You're always going to find weird engineering like this in these older kits, and that's part of what makes them so interesting to go back and build. Having said that, the bulk of this kit is really just polycap sandwiches. Sure, these polycaps are used in some pretty unique ways, but just look at this manual. This entire left side of the page is just squeezing polycaps between 2 gray pieces. While there were some interesting aspects of this old school build, like the abundance of ball joints in unique places, I'd say most of this build was actually pretty straightforward. I do have to give it some real praise though, for the engineering of these legs. They have a full inner frame, and a pretty solid one at that. It allows for some great part separation on this white armor. There's also next to no seam lines here, at least on the front, I mean. There is a pretty harsh seam line running up the entire back of the leg. Still, it's always cool to see Bandai beginning to really think about how all these pieces would fit together. These are the kinds of small changes that over the course of 25 years gets us to the detailed engineering we're so used to seeing in modern Gunpla. Now, as much as I'd love to dig more into some of this old school engineering, it's not really the defining aspect of this build. No, if there's anything I'm going to remember this build for, it's all this painting. While that's totally to be expected of an older kit, this may be a little too much, so I've included a timestamp with the description if you want to skip it. Alright, now let's run through all this painting here, starting with these feet. You'll first need to add this gray line to the toe. It has a pretty decent channel here, so I just hit it with a gray Gundam marker. I did the same for these black sections on the front. On the ankle guards, we have this side vent that I hit with a gray Gundam marker. Pretty easy to do given they just pop off. There's also this channel on the back of the ankle guards that looks great with some added gray. Working our way up the leg, we have this nice channel on the side. Like I mentioned in my GP03 review, these thick panel lines on the side of the limbs are super easy to paint, as there's a channel molded into one of these pieces. Now onto the back of the leg, we have these small vents that I dabbed some red into. Because this gray section just pops off, it's really easy to get looking half decent. All these sections so far have been optional for the most part. You can probably get away with skipping most of them. However, this red section on the knee is absolutely mandatory to paint up. Even though he does come with red stickers, they'll pop up in, no joke, about 30 seconds. They'll almost always look worse than painting, regardless of your skill level. Thankfully, it's not too difficult to drop a red Gundam marker in here. Moving on up to the thigh, we have some more nice deep channels to add some gray paint into. While I would have liked to have added black into these locks on the side of the leg, they're actually molded into the frame. they're going to be real annoying to get paint into, so I just didn't even bother. However, this inner frame color is so dark, I don't think many people are going to notice. Onto this waist section, it's surprisingly paint-free, just basic panel lining here and there. There is this yellow section in the middle though, that is an included sticker. Not a great one, as it often ends up lopsided, but it's on a flat surface, so it holds up so much better than those knee stickers. I actually ended up just leaving the sticker on. But if you did want to paint it, there are some nice guidelines in here to help you out. By the way, this kit doesn't actually come with any yellow pieces. Yeah, all these yellow details are either stickers or paint. I guess that's one way for Bandai to keep the price down. But also, seriously? Even a small yellow section on the A runner would have saved quite a bit of time and frustration on the painting side. Anyway, back to this waist section. I decided to opt for the provided sticker for this black section on the bottom. While I could see painting it, like the yellow section I just mentioned, this piece is flat enough that the sticker has no problem holding on, so I just left it. Next up, I added this black into this channel on the side of the chest. Again, real easy as the channel is between two separate pieces. One place I'd really like to paint, but had to skip over, are these gray hinges in the chest. They allow for the cockpit to open up, and that's great and all, but in the anime, this whole chest section is supposed to be blue. I'm sure you know just how difficult it is to color match Gundam blue, especially when going over a darker surface like this, so I'm not even going to try on this one. Maybe if I did a full paint job and could really nail a consistent shade of blue. Now we come to probably the hardest painting location on this kit, and unfortunately, it's basically mandatory. It's this yellow V on the chest. This kit does come with a pretty bad sticker, but you know it'll never look as good as paint. This section is raised up, so it's not too difficult to get some masking tape around it to really help get those hard edges. Still, it is not a fun paint job and takes quite a bit of patience. It's a real bummer too, since it's so prominent, but if you work at it, you can get it looking alright. You'll also need that yellow paint for these chest vents, as they're more crappy stickers. While these stickers do fare a bit better than that V on the chest, they tend to fold into the vent a little bit, given how recessed this piece is. Paint is really the way to go here. It can be a little tricky with how it's molded into these removable pieces, but it's totally doable with some patience. Adding the black inside of this yellow was a little more than I was looking for though, so I decided to put that off for another time. Back to the more easy painting locations, we have these gray camera lenses on the top of the chest. Yeah, there's no provided sticker here, so paint is absolutely mandatory. They come as separate clear pieces though, so they're pretty quick paint jobs. Next up, I dropped a dab of gray paint into this gray circle on the front, as it comes in all blue. Onto these shoulders, there's quite a bit of work needed here, as these come in all white. First up, I painted this molded in circle on the top of the shoulder. I went with yellow, as that's how it is in the anime, though the manual doesn't have this section painted at all, so it's entirely up to you. Regardless, since this piece is raised up, it's a pretty quick paint job, so I went for it. The same can't be said for this channel around the circle though. It's just molded directly into the piece. I could see this being really difficult to get black or gray paint into, so I just decided to go with panel lining and hope no one notices. The side of the shoulder is a little bit better, as this vent is partially a separate piece. It was really easy to paint this separate piece red, then this section it snaps into black. However, like that top section I just mentioned, the space around this vent is molded in. Again, getting paint into this section is going to be really annoying, so I just went with gray panel lining instead. It didn't stick as well as I'd like though, so I might have to give it another pass. I did try to make up for my laziness though, by at least painting the inside of the shoulders gray. They're all white with no inner frame inside, but it was pretty simple to pop these off, paint them up, then snap them back on. Working our way down the arm, we have some more nice deep channels you can throw some gray paint into. Of course, we still have these locks on the side that are molded as a single piece. Unfortunately, these are white pieces though, so they stand out way more than those locks on the legs. I ended up just going with panel lining. Next up, we have these green lenses on the backpack. Like the chest cameras, these come as a separate clear piece, so it's real simple to paint up. The backpack also benefits from adding some red into these molded in thrusters. It just helps to break up all this gray, you know? Alright, now let's finally take a look at this head. Like all the other camera lenses on this kit, you'll need to paint up this green section on top, as there's no provided sticker. Again though, it's a separate clear piece, so real easy to get looking good. The same can't be said for the back of the head though, as there's no separate piece here. It's also a pretty recessed section, so really hard to get paint into. It is on the back of the head though, so I didn't feel too bad skipping it. I did add some gray paint into these circles though, just to help distract from it. Back to the front of the head, I tried painting the head Vulcans yellow. They are molded into the head though, so they're never going to look 100%. The sample build in the manual even just left them white. However, they are yellow in the anime, so naturally I had to at least give it a try. I also added a bit of gray paint into these little sections on the V-fin, and then this little black dot to the center, just to spice things up a little bit. And lastly, and I mean lastly here, we have these gray vents on the side of the head. I really would have liked to have hit these with a gray Gundam marker, but they're molded into the head. They're also extremely deep inside this piece, so I really don't see any way to get paint in here and have it look clean. Instead, I just opted for the usual gray panel lining instead. And I think that should about cover it. While this GP01 was generally a pretty easy snap build with some interesting old school engineering, I can't really recommend it to beginners. There's just so much painting to do here, and much of it is really annoying to get looking good. Still, if you're into detailing, or maybe you're specifically looking to get some practice in, this build might be what you're looking for. For everyone else though, this build is probably a little more trouble than it's worth, deserving a 2.5 out of 5. That sounds kinda negative, I know, but really if you're into old school kits or detailing, then you might actually get a lot out of this guy. Now that we've got this kit all detailed up, let's see how he turned out. Being an older kit, this Master Grade GP01 came out back when Bandai was a bit more freeform with their kit's appearances. I'm not just talking about this alteration to the knee either. Yeah, Bandai decided to retroactively add this knee section from the GP03 into both of the GP01 units. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but it's whatever. More importantly, when I say freeform, I'm mainly talking about these proportions. While he is quite a bit slimmed up compared to how he appeared in the anime, there's still quite a bit of bulk found throughout this silhouette. The legs, for example, may have the usual slimming up. They even look extra long with this tiny front skirt armor. But there's still lots of great curves and edges here. I really like how Bandai kept the heft of this front knee section and the ankle guards. They just look fantastic. The arms are a bit thinner and blockier, but the size of these shoulders really makes up for them. The head also has a really great shape to it, with these huge vents on the side and a really prominent V-fin. The chest is also very in proportion to the limbs. Despite being smaller than how it was in the anime, this chest still features that huge cockpit hatch that really helps define this suit's look. Overall, these proportions are pretty solid for an old school kit. However, the colors are a different story. This 1997 plastic feels so much cheaper than modern kits, and in general has a very glossy sheen to it. This red specifically is pretty cheap looking, being way too saturated. The brightness is also cranked up to 11, leading to a really toyish look. This blue is quite a bit better though. While it's also a bit too saturated, it seems to have a slightly darker hue to it, leading it to blend in a bit more with this base white. Speaking of this base white though, it's not exactly what I'm looking for. Despite the red and blue having their saturation really amped up, this white turned out very dull looking. I will say though, it blends in pretty well with this gray inner frame, but I'd much rather have a really standout pure white fitting of a lead suit, you know? Rounding out these colors, I was gonna mention how much I liked these yellow highlights, but then I remembered they're literally all paint and stickers, so yeah. Anyway, while I'm not the biggest fan of these colors, I do really like these proportions, so I'm willing to bet a full paint job would have this kit looking fantastic. On to these details. If you've already seen my review of the FB version of this suit, then you know that one of my biggest complaints with that kit was how inconsistent the details were. This kit, being the original version of the GP01, is much more cohesive. he has the same level of detail from top to bottom, and it just looks amazing. The GP series tended to be overloaded with details, but this Master Grade decides to trim them down to just the bare essentials. He has these really prominent panel lines running all over this kit, and yet they don't distract from the Gundam underneath. Each one looks like it's there for a purpose, and not just for the sake of overcomplicating the design. For those that want a bit more detail though, this kit does come with optional pieces you can just add on. They're this extra runner of hatches that you can just glue on wherever you'd like. You know me though, I prefer a much more clean look, so these went straight into a Ziploc bag. Still, they're a nice addition for those that want to do even further detailing. You get 2 sets of decals for this kit. The first is the standard set of peel and stick caution signs. There are a few model numbers in here, but it's mainly stickers aimed at adding more details. I'm a much bigger fan of this set's dry transfers. You get quite a few model numbers and production decals here. I used one on each shoulder to fit in more with the GP series of suits. You know, despite this kit's age, I think he actually holds up very well to modern standards. His proportions may be a little wonky compared to modern kits, but I still think they're pretty solid here. I also really like the use of panel lines and details. The colors are really my only gripe here, but that's nothing a couple coats of paint can't fix. We'll give this appearance an above average score of 4 out of 5. While I'm sure newer fans are going to gravitate to the real grade version, I can't help but like this cleaner take on the GP01. Now with this build and appearance out of the way, let's see what kind of articulation this kit has. As always, starting with these feet, both the heel and toe can tilt slightly in all directions. Yeah, they're actually on polycap ball joints. A little strange for sure, but considering how common it is for older kits to just have bricks for feet, I really can't complain here. The ankles are also on a ball joint, so you get a decent amount of movement, enough for your usual standing poses. Onto that all-important knee bend, we get a little more than a 90-degree bend from these 2 joints. Pretty solid stuff. Also, this knee section is connected to the top of these 2 joints. While it doesn't have any sort of interesting mechanical movement here, you can manually move it up and down. I will make a note though, that these knees feel a little on the looser side. Nothing crazy, and I don't foresee any weight issues, but it's worth mentioning. I think it has to do with how this upper thigh connects to the knee via polycaps rather than a solid piece of plastic. The hips are that old school polycap ball joint, so you get great kicks, but only alright splits. There is a slight spin here too, but it's pretty restricted. All of the waist skirts are independent. Given how small they are and the limited hip movement though, I rarely ever needed to move them out of the way. Onto this chest, we actually have a core fighter in here. As cool as that idea is, it means you're not going to get any ab crunches here. You only get a spin and some very slight tilts from a ball joint at the waist. The backpack here is also a little flimsy. It's supposed to be locked in place with this flap that goes over top. However, it never really stays in place. It's not a big deal and doesn't affect his posing options, but you do need to be a little more careful than you'd expect when you're messing with it. On the bright side, unlike that FB variant that came out just after this kit, because this GP01 doesn't have much of a backpack, he doesn't have any of those weight issues. He can stand straight up, no problem. Working our way up the shoulders, we get a polycap on a peg. So a full 360-degree spin, and he can almost get his arms parallel to the ground. It's not quite as much as I'd like, but it's functional for most poses. Moving down the arm, we get that weird ball joint in the upper arm. Despite how unique it is, it basically amounts to the usual spin. You get a very solid 135-degree bend from the elbow. Very nice for such an old school kit. The hands are on pretty loose ball joints. I find that if you get them at the wrong angle though, they tend to slump down. Not the best, but they get the job done. You get 3 sets of hands with this kit. A dedicated closed fist, a dedicated open hand, and the usual trigger finger split style. Like most kits from this time period, there's no peg here, so getting him to hold these weapons can be a bit of a challenge. It's not the most difficult thing, considering how the handle of his rifle and beam sabers are pretty big, but you still might want to have some double-sided tape or something on hand. Lastly, we have this head, which is on a pretty deep ball joint. While it does provide decent enough movement, I have found that this head can occasionally get caught on his collar. Honestly though, I was a little hesitant to move around this head too much, as it has a really big V-fin on top and a smaller antenna on the back. These are exactly the kind of pieces that would break off if you hit them the wrong way. Thankfully, these antennae are made of a softer rubber material. This works wonders for the back antenna, but not so much for the front V-fin. Maybe it's because this is such a thick V-fin, but I really can't tell the difference between it and regular plastic. Still, it is considered a softer plastic than the rest of this kit, so Bandai was courteous enough to also include an additional V-fin made of standard plastic. It requires painting for this red section in the middle though, so I just stuck with the rubber one instead. And that about wraps up all these joints. If you've built an old school Master Grade, then you know exactly what you're getting here. He can hit all your standard poses here, specifically ones where both feet are firmly planted, but you're not really going to get much else here. I've also noticed my kit specifically is a little looser than I'd expect. Nothing that bad, but in comparison to the GP03 that was released a little after this kit, he's noticeably easier to work with. It's probably based on how many polycaps were used in this build. They really can be hit or miss, especially because most of these old school Master Grades have been sitting on shelves for so many years. Anyway, while I wouldn't buy this kit for its articulation, you can still get the usual old school poses. I'd say this kit's articulation is about average, deserving a 3 out of 5. That may not seem like a high score, but considering how many kits this old are just bricks, this kit is holding up extremely well. And finally, it's time to take a look at what gimmicks this kit comes with. First up is the token beam rifle. If you've built any of the other Stardust Memory suits, then you know exactly what you're getting here. It's basically a few big gray pieces sandwiched together. There's really no interesting part separation, and you even need to paint this red on the scope, as it comes in clear. He can hold this rifle relatively well though, or at least I've seen way worse than this. Despite there not being any pegs in the hands, this handle is pretty decently sized to fit inside his hands without too much effort. He also comes with a few additional ammo packs that you can store on the shield. Next up, we have his 2 beam sabers. These handles are just massive, way larger than the usual beam sabers. They just look so fantastic when stored on his backpack. These large handles also give these hands more than enough room to grip onto. Rounding out his arsenal, he has this shield. I'm a huge fan of the GP series shields. They just have such clean designs, but still have more than enough detail to keep them interesting. This shield also has this really cool folding feature. However, in the anime series, this shield is supposed to pop up instead. Of course, that would require a much more complex mechanism, so I'm more than content with this unfolding version instead. I do wish it had a stronger connection though. Mine just never seems to stay folded up. This shield plugs into the back of the arm pretty securely with a polycap. I really haven't had any weight issues with it, but I wouldn't be surprised if the abundance of polycaps used in these joints have it not aging too well. Also, yeah, you're gonna need to do some painting on this shield. Thankfully, it's nothing on the front, as everything comes in its correct white and blue. Even these side pieces that you think should be gray actually come in their anime accurate white. All the painting here falls on the back of the shield, where it's almost all white pieces. I did just a little bit of gray painting here, but really, the majority of this shield is supposed to be gray. Lastly, this kit comes with a fully transformable core fighter. It looks pretty solid, having quite a few details sprinkled throughout. The part separation is also very good, with its white, blue, and gray all looking great. This core fighter does require a little bit of painting though, in the form of these vents on the top and front. The top vents are pretty hidden away when this suit is transformed, so I had no issue skipping them. However, these on the front are very visible when in Gundam form. Like I mentioned in the build, the provided stickers are pretty poor, so painting them is basically required. His included landing gear also requires a generous amount of paint. This core fighter also comes with an optional set of front vents for when the core fighter is displayed on its own. They come in all white though, so they're gonna need some attention to get looking good. They do come with yellow stickers you could use, but they entirely cover up these molded in fins. I'm only ever gonna have this kit in Gundam form though, so I didn't feel the need to paint these up. If this kit came with a dedicated core block, then it'd be a different story. but as it stands, you'll never actually get to display this core fighter on its own. Lacking a dedicated core block, this core fighter is basically always inside the chest of this Gundam. This is always annoying to me, as it really takes away from how cool these core fighters can be. And that about does it for these gimmicks. It's really all the essentials and nothing more. The weapons function pretty well, and the core fighter does serve its purpose, but there's nothing really that stands out here. If you've built a Master Grade before, then you know exactly what you're getting here. So naturally, these gimmicks deserve an average score of 3 out of 5. This kit really could have used some additional weapons, or maybe a dedicated core block. Alright, it's time to wrap all this up here. The build was a 2.5 out of 5. While it's always interesting seeing some old school engineering, this amount of detailing is just crazy. Bandai really should have included a yellow runner here too. The appearance was a solid 4 out of 5. I really like these proportions and details. I would, however, not be against a full paint job. The articulation was a 3 out of 5. He can hit all your classic Master Grade poses, just not much else. And the gimmicks received another 3 out of 5. It's all the essentials, but not much else. Tallying all that up, dividing, and of course with a little bit of rounding, this kit receives a 3.13 out of 5. In terms of an unrounded percentage, this kit receives a 62.5%. I know that seems kinda low, but thinking back, it does make sense. As much as I enjoy this kit's build, he took a ton of work to get looking good. Of course, there's still quite a few reasons to pick this kit up. Not only is it super interesting to see old school engineering, but once you put in all that effort, you're left with a pretty great looking Gundam. I'm sure more experienced builders can turn out some really amazing looking builds using this Master Grade as the base. His proportions are very solid, he has great details, and he can hit some solid poses given his age. I mean, it's all here. While I would totally not be against a revamp of this kit, maybe in the form of a Verka or version 2.0, I'm still really happy with how this build turned out. I still don't recommend this to first time builders, but if you're down to give this GP01 some attention, then I think you'll find that this 25-year-old kit can still hold up. And that should about do it here. Let me know if you have any questions about this kit in the comments, and I'm more than happy to get back to you. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter under RedHeadphones6, or feel free to subscribe to this channel for more reviews. Alright, thanks for watching, and see you next time.